Hey, my name is Kyle Knabb. I'm a consultant with IBIS Inc. and today we'll be discussing some security-related administrative tasks for CRM 2015. So let's hop right in. We're going to talk about some basic security tasks and then get into a little bit more advanced. The most basic would be adding a user and giving them roles in CRM. Then we might need to edit some security roles within CRM. And then later, if problems arise, you may need to troubleshoot access for your users, why they maybe can't see some buttons that they want to see, or maybe they're actually getting some errors and you need to troubleshoot those. So let's jump in. The first thing we'll demonstrate is how to add a user. So within CRM, if you are a system administrator, you have permission to control what users are active and inactive in your organization. So if we go to settings, and I'm already in security, but in 2015 on the nav bar, what used to be in administration as far as users and roles and that is now in its own security tile. So if we were looking to add a new user, we'll go to that list and we click the new button. And because CRM, on premise at least, pulls or authenticates against Active Directory, what you're going to type into the username field is either the domain and username, and then as soon as you tab off, CRM will automatically pull information out of Active Directory. Now I can't save this one because my own user already exists, so I'm going to go back to security and users. And at this point, if this was truly a brand new user, I would also have a yellow bar here at the top of the application that says you need to assign roles to users who have no roles, because a user, even though you've created them, cannot even log in or do anything until they have a role. So to do that, if you select the user, then in your overflow menu you'll have an option called Manage Roles. And all this does is allow you to select one or more roles to assign to that user. And there's many out-of-the-box roles that are pretty basic, like a salesperson is salesperson in your organization. So if you give them this role, they'll have some normal read-write access to sales opportunities, sales leads, things like that. A marketing professional might have more privileges in the marketing module around campaigns. And then maybe a customer service representative can do more things in the service module around managing cases for your clients. So by checking one or more of these, you're assigning a role to a user. And just to demonstrate, I'll uncheck all of these. And if I open up a window under my own name, I get this message as a user, I don't have any roles. So if I give myself a role, how about just salesperson? Try this again. Then I get to log in hunky-dory. And if I went to sales, well, I have no open leads, but I could then do activities per the privileges of that security role. So let's see what's actually in that security role, the salesperson role. I'll go back to my admin web page over here. And back in the security area, there's a button for security roles. And IBIS's own list has many of the all the defaults plus many custom ones, because we have a couple solutions installed like Click Dimensions, Dun & Bradstreet, and Expert Doc, all of which come with their own custom roles. So if we double click on the salesperson security role, we see some details, and then on each of these tabs we can see what privileges the salesperson role has against records in CRM. Take, for example, the contact record, the contact entity. A person with only the salesperson role can create contacts, and then they can read contacts across the entire organization, and they can also write to any contact record across the org, which means if somebody other than this user owns a contact record for, say, Bob's Garage, or the owner of Bob's Garage, Bob, then I, as a salesperson, could still edit that record even though I don't own it, simply because this bubble here, write for contact, is green. To edit my privilege against writing to contacts, I can click on that bubble. It circled back around from organization to none, and if I click it again, it goes up through the progression of user, business unit, parent-child business units, and org again. If you wanted to change all of these bubbles at the same time, you can click on the name of the entity itself, and they'll all move in unison. So that's privileges against individual entities. And then if you scroll down to the bottom of any tab, there's a little section of miscellaneous privileges. And so there's one here in core records, marketing has a few, sales has some. But some of these end up being pretty important. Something like in the sales module, if you want people to be able to manually enter prices on opportunity products, so opportunity line items, they need to have this privilege, the ability to override opportunity pricing. Otherwise, they'll never, any opportunity that they create or edit, it's always going to have to be auto-calculated unless they have that privilege. And then on this final tab is where everything not out of the box appears. So this list will get pretty long as you add more and more custom entities, and this list will also be the most sparsely populated, except for the read column, because most people can read. That's not too big of a deal. But many times for custom entities, you don't want to manage privileges on custom entities that for solutions that you've purchased, because you can rely usually on the fact that the company who developed the solution in the first place has also set up the privileges correctly on their own roles. So for example, all of these Dun & Bradstreet entities have empty rows because we can rely on the fact that these Dun & Bradstreet roles will have the appropriate privileges. And on that note, it's also a bad idea to edit the out-of-the-box security roles at all. So I was clicking around in the bubbles in the salesperson security role, but I'm going to advise against that. So I'm going to close that without saving. And what you can do, instead of editing the out-of-the-box, simply because you want to have something to fall back on. So if you select the salesperson and you want to copy it, we'll say this is a power salesperson. Click OK. Now this power salesperson, we'll define that as being a salesperson that has even more privileges than the average Joe salesperson. We will say that they can create products and they can delete products, as well as deleting competitors from the face of the earth. So let me flip back to my own Kyle Nav window. And if we look under the sales module at the products area, so we get a list of our products, nothing special, but notice I have no button for new. But if I go back to the user, Kyle Nab, and give him the power salesperson role, I'll refresh this page. Now I have the ability to add products, product families, and product bundles. So CRM, at runtime, every time it loads a page, it evaluates all of the security roles that a user belongs to determine what to present to the user. These buttons won't be available if I can't do what the buttons are for. Another component of CRM security is team membership. So back on the security page itself, we looked at users, we looked at roles, but then there's teams. You can think of teams as being similar to an Active Directory group, simply a group of people, and then you can assign security roles to teams and then make users members of teams, and then by virtue of a person's membership on a team, they get all the security roles of that team as well. So it's just perks of, say, being on the CRM team. Then as a member of the CRM team, well, you actually get no roles, but let's say everybody on CRM is a system administrator. I would advise against that. So let's say everybody on CRM is a Dynamics CRM user. Then whether they have that role directly associated with them or not, they can still do everything that the Dynamics CRM user role allows, simply because they're members of the CRM team. From a technical standpoint, sometimes team membership is a better way to assign roles, to assign security privileges to users instead of on an individual basis, simply because there's less rows in the CRM database to go through every time CRM loads a page and has to evaluate security. So if you have a high number of users that need the exact same permissions, it may be worth your while, both in terms of CRM speed and administrative time, to make one team with that set of security roles and make many users a member of that team. That's kind of permissions 101. So now that we've looked at how to make a user and give them security roles and even edit the security roles by copying an out-of-the-box one and editing that, what if a user is still missing some roles and we need to troubleshoot, okay, this person needs to have some privileges, but what roles can provide that privilege? So let's say, for example, Kyle Nab, he for some reason needs to be able to make cases in the service module. Well, obviously, he's going to come to a CRM administrator and say, why is this button gone? I need to be able to make cases. Or maybe if you had any kind of customization that automatically made cases, then every time that customization fired under the auspices of Kyle Nab, it would throw an error. So that'd be even more confusing for Kyle. So at this point, as a CRM administrator, you need to figure out what can we do to give Kyle the ability to create cases. Well, you can open your roles one by one and look for a role that can create cases. Or another alternative is a third-party tool called the XRM Toolbox. And we'll put a link in the description of this video. But the XRM Toolbox is exactly what it sounds like. It's a little collection of tools for your use as a CRM administrator. And it's available on Codeplex and GitHub. And many developers in the CRM community contribute various plugins into the toolbox. And a good one for this situation, where we need to find what roles have a privilege, is the Privilege Discovery plugin. So with the toolbox, I'm already connected to my on-premise CRM deployment. I'll load up the roles and privileges, and we want to know what roles can be used to create a case. So you can search, well, case doesn't work because they're actually called incidents. And okay, Kyle needs to be able to create, and we'll say also write, and add that, obviously read too. So what roles match this? We could probably give him that because it's a very basic one, and that's something you may have known off the top of your head, but in a more complex scenario, maybe a different combination of roles would be harder to find than just cases. So here we can settle with, okay, we'll give Kyle the customer service rep security role. So now he is a privileged man. And he's happy because now he can make cases to bring in some money from the customers. So let's say the decision of what privilege Kyle needed was really not that easy. Maybe he was getting an error that didn't tell him, Kyle, you're missing this role and you can't do anything until you continue. Maybe the error from that customization I briefly glossed over is not that helpful. At this point, you may need to turn on tracing in your CRM environment. And tracing is basically logging for CRM that writes everything the system is doing to a log file on the server. So we'll pop open our server here. And there are two options for how to turn on tracing, depending on how you've deployed CRM itself in the first place. If CRM is deployed in a multi-server scenario, like you have a whole farm of CRM servers, then your best bet to turn on tracing is with PowerShell. Microsoft has a useful couple of lines that they made available on TechNet. Basically, you have, well, with PowerShell, first you have to add PowerShell toolset. And then if we see what the tracing settings currently are, we can see they're not enabled, and it will only trace for errors when it is enabled. So to enable it, we can use this line, and let's say we want to show everything, we would run that line, and then finally we commit it with the set command. So now it's committed. Forgot an S. Current state of tracing is now true and showing everything. And as the system runs, your logs will show up in this file right here. Your C drive, CRM drop folder, logs folder. So I'm going to turn that off real quick. False. Good. Now in a simpler scenario, if you're running a one server CRM deployment, maybe it's all of your server roles are on one server, you can still have SQL on another server. The kind of old school way to do it is with a registry edit. So we'll run regedit, and at this path of HKey local machine, software, Microsoft, and then all the way down to MS CRM, there's a couple registry entries that'll set up tracing for you. One is called trace enabled, and this is a D word with a value of either 0 or 1. 0 means tracing is off, 1 means tracing is on. And every time you change this, CRM doesn't know about the change until you also change the value of a second entry called trace refresh. So if we change this to anything other than what it was before, then tracing will spin up. So now tracing is on. When you turn on tracing through the registry editor, then your path to those log files will be C, program files, Dynamics CRM, trace. And we get a whole bunch of log files modified on the minute you turn them on. If we dig into one, it's going to be pretty dense. It's not something you print out and read. Maybe you want to do a Control F to find a particular error code or error message that your user has reported to you. But once these things get very large, then Control F just doesn't cut it anymore. So there's a better way to read through them, and that's with another third-party tool, which the link I'll also put into the description is called CRM Trace Reader. If we run this guy and we open that directory, all this does is parse those log files into a just column format, which is much easier to use. Maybe somebody has sent you the trace files themselves, then you can open an individual file. Here I have a CRM debug folder, this particular trace file. And this is one of those large files that we need help going through. So using the filters on the left, you could select what CRM operation are we really looking for. A more useful filter might be the level of action that was traced. So we're going to look for only errors. Well, that's a much shorter list. And then what threads fall under here. We have 178 and 115. Well, let's look at 115 first. We can see that these are all probably part of the same transaction because the timestamp is only milliseconds apart. So 115, I usually look for something that's plain English. Okay, so here at the bottom, there is no active transaction. This error is usually caused by custom plugins that ignore errors from service calls and continue to process. Okay, so we have a bad plugin that's ignoring errors and it's just barreling on. What's the plugin? This doesn't really say. We can check when it happens. Okay, so another in the same thread, another error is we failed to process message create for contacts. So CRM is trying to create a contact, but it's failing. Before that, we get message name, okay, qualify lead. So somebody's qualifying a lead, which is in turn creating a contact. So we're working backwards here. We go back one more step. Okay, we have the same error again, so not useful. And then one more down, failed to process qualified lead. Well, this is the last timestamp thing. So if we look at the thread right before it, we can find a different error message. Here's a very useful one. Principal user with this ID is missing this privilege. So we could find out what user this ID belongs to. In a scenario, it's probably the user who reported the error to you in the first place. So don't waste your time looking for anything. It's probably that user. And we can see that they're missing a privilege. And this one in particular is the privilege to write to this entity called CDI_sent email. So Click Dimensions is a plugin that has its own custom entities, one of which is called sent email. And apparently whenever a user tries to qualify a lead, the qualification creates a contact and then writes that contact into a field on the sent email entity. Well, if the user doesn't have that privilege, then the plugin is just going to fail and will prevent that user from qualifying the lead at all. So where the user was originally receiving this message, which doesn't tell you anything, the trace log revealed something a little bit more useful. User is missing a privilege, at which point you can do the normal familiar CRM action, at which point you can figure out what role grants that privilege. So let's see, sent email. We have this toolbox open still. Sent. Okay, there's a sent email. Remove all these. What roles can write to the sent email? Well, we'll just refresh it. Only 4. The core, these 2 Click Dimensions roles, and also, of course, these system admin roles. So I think we need to give that user a Click Dimensions core security role. And at that point, they should be able to qualify their lead. While I have the toolbox open, I'll just point out a couple other tools that are helpful around security, and that's going to be the access checker. So that allows you to check against an individual record what a user can do on that record. And then the user role manager lets you choose roles and then choose on the left and then choose users on the right and match them up. So this is just a way to bulk edit roles for many people at one time. So those were some administrative tasks around security with CRM, from basic setup to some more advanced troubleshooting. I hope you learned something today. Check out the descriptions for links to those tools, and thanks for watching.